Hey there guys, TC Made with TC Gaming. Wanted to bring you an update on this video for the RPG series. In our last video we were working on animating and opening up a chest with an interaction, and I said that I would bring you some more updated information on how to do that using something called a timeline. So in this episode we're going to talk a little bit about a timeline to play this animation. Just to take us back to where we were previously, if I walk over here to interact with this chest, I see my E to interact pops up. When I hit it, it plays this animation, but the animation loops right back to a closed state. And some of this might be an animation issue with a bug in the engine, because technically this should have opened and stayed open since I had trimmed all these animations up. But it looks like it's still keeping one of the frames at the end of that. So I don't know if that'll get fixed in a future update for Unreal, but it's our problem right now, and we're going to figure out a quick way to fix this. So what we want to do here is we want to animate this lid using a thing called a timeline. So again, we go back to our chest top, and we can look at this skeletal mesh, and we double left click on it here. We can go to the skeleton for that. And in our skeleton, we can see that we have a couple of different bones that are in here. You see the little bone icon. So there's one here called Group 001. And if we set our thing on Select and Rotate Objects, we can grab a hold of this top. And this Group 001, we can highlight that. And when we change this, we can actually see that it would open our lid. Okay? If you look over here on the right-hand side, you can see that it's mainly updating this value over here called pitch, which is our Y value. So what we want to do is we want to adjust our Y value over time whenever we interact with this. So the way to do this, I'm going to set this back at 0. And actually you can zero these out if you want to. It doesn't really matter too much, I don't think, here. But we'll just zero these back out. And we'll go back into our chest BP. Now we can go out here and find that skeletal mesh. And when we find the skeletal mesh, if we right-click on that, we can say Create Anim Blueprint. And it'll give us a new one called Chest Anim Top Skeleton Anim Blueprint. You can rename this whatever you want to. I'm just going to leave that name. If I double left-click in here, I have my output pose. What I want to do is prior to my output pose, I want to transform or modify the settings on a bone. So if you go transform, modify, it'll bring up this thing for transform, modify bone. What we want to do is we want to take the output of this into our output pose. It'll automatically create this component to local variable for us. Once we have our value there for the transform modify bone, what you want to do is click on this and tell it what bone you're trying to modify. Well, we know from looking it up previously that it's group 001. And what we want to do is we want to change this Y value. So if I were to go in here and put a Y value of like 45 in here and say compile, what we should see is this says no components to modify selected. So the other thing you have to look for over here, you have to stretch this out a little bit, but there's a couple of settings in here where it shows you the translation, rotation, and scale. And right now I don't have a mode set on it. So what I want to do is under rotation mode, I'm going to tell it to replace the existing. Whatever's on there already gets updated with whatever's in this transform. So you can see here when I set that to 45, it automatically adjusted that to 45. If I were to go back over here and set this to 0, it goes back to 0. If I set it to 100, it goes all the way open, etc., etc., etc. So I'm just going to set it on 0 for now. What we want to do is we want to supply this value from a variable. And so what we can do is we can right-click on this rotation and say promote to variable. And it'll give us this value here. Now, I'm going to change the name of this. I'm going to call this lid rotation. And we're going to save that and compile it. And if we go now, what we can do is we can update this value. You see lid rotation has a value here. So if I were to set this at like say 50, again, now I'm changing the value of this lid rotation variable, which is being fed into the rotation pin, which updates the pose. And what we want to do is we want to go and create on our character something that drives this value of lid rotation. And then what we're going to do in this event graph is we're going to get from our character, from our chest BP, we're going to get that value. Now, our chest BP was originally an actor. And in order to get a value from this for what we're trying to modify or drive here, what I did is I switched this over to a pawn, because what we're doing is trying to get a pawn owner in here. So if you go to your chest BP under class defaults, under class settings, you can change this parent class to pawn, and it'll switch this over as your parent class will be pawn. And to do that, you just go in here and type in pawn, and you'll find it. It's actually highlighted, so it's hard to see the word, but it looks like a little chess pawn. So you can click on that, and it'll change your parent class. Well, now that you have your parent class changed, what we can do over here is we can say cast to chest BP, and the object type now is of type pawn. And while we have that in here in our update, we can now pull objects off here and get different values from that. Okay, so we'll go in here and we'll set up a variable for doing that in our timeline. Before I get too much further, I see that there's warnings in here. So actually what it is, I should have cast to the chest, not to the chest top. When I pulled this out, I meant to say cast to chest underscore BP. I grabbed the wrong one. And then, of course, this object, this is a pawn. And if we compile, we shouldn't have any issues there. I just grabbed the wrong value. So make sure you grab the chest BP. And we'll go into the chest BP. So inside of our blueprint here, what we could do is we'll right-click and take off your context sensitivity for a second and just type in get lid rotation, and you want the one from chest anim top skeleton anim BP. And then right-click on this, and you can just say promote to variable, and that'll give you your lid rotation rotator over here. And we're just going to do that because we're going to set these values in a second. And what we want to do is we want to create something in here off of this, where this play animation used to be. We're going to get rid of this, and we're going to create a new thing called a timeline. So if we right-click in and say timeline, we should be able to put a new one in here. And I don't know if you have to say add timeline. Yeah, add timelines all the way at the bottom. If you have your context sensitivity turned back on, to be a much shorter list. So you go in here and add a timeline. I'll just call this chest top rotation. And the way that the timeline is going to work is that you can actually use these for a couple different things. I'm going to use it so that when I hit this rotation timeline, it's just going to play from 0 to some specified time, and over the course of that time, we're going to update a float value, and then we're going to pass that float value onto the setting of this lid rotation, and then we're going to get that lid rotation value from the chest and pass it onto the animation blueprint. So the way that that'll work in our case here is we're going to say whenever we play this, we want to double left click on here, and it'll bring up our timeline window. And there's really nothing here. So what we want to do is add a track. We want to add a float track. And in our float track here, we're just going to call this chest lid open. You could call it percentage or whatever you want to. I'm just going to say value. And right-clicking on this line will give us the opportunity to put on these things called keys. Very similar to like an animation blueprint, so I'll just put 2 keys in here. And in the first key, if you click on it, this is your time and then value axes. So you can go in here and say at time 0, I want this to be a value of 0. And over here, you can specify a time where you want this to move to another value. So I'll just, for this sake, I'll say 1 second. And at 1 second, I want the value to be, let's say, 60, which is going to be the percentage of open that we want on our chest here. And then if we want to see these values, you can zoom these in to fit. So right here at 1 second, I'm at a value of 60, and at 0 seconds, I'm at a value of 0. So over a 1 second period, we'll drive that value up. So we'll compile that, and then we can just close this little window here. And now what we have is on our update, what we can do is we can set that chest lid open value, we can run that out to set this rotator. So what we'll do is we'll drag this lid rotation out and we'll say set lid rotation on the update. And you see here we have a float, and over here we have a rotator. So if you right click on this, you can say split the struct pin, and that'll give you 3 float values. And we know that we're trying to drive the lid rotation Y, or the pitch. So we're going to say that we want this value from here. We want to bring this out, and we're going to hit shift and the number 8, which is going to give us the asterisk. And the asterisk brings up the multiplier operator. And we're going to multiply this value times 100. And we want to take the value of that into the lid rotation Y pitch. So what we're saying is play this from 0 to 1 second, update the chest lid open value from 0 to 60 over that time, take whatever that current value is while you're updating it and send that out and set that as our new rotation and pitch on this variable. When we say compile and save that, we're going to go back over to the chest animation here. And now that we have that on our chest BP, we can pull this off and say get lid rotation from our characters, from our chest, right? And then what we want to do over here is we have this value. We want to pull this out and say set lid rotation. And we want to set that lid rotation using that value. Okay, so we compile this and save it. And if we go out to our map now and hit play, we should be able to walk up to this, and when we hit E, it should have updated our thing. Let's go look at it. Okay, so the reason it didn't do anything is because in our chest BP, we also have to go over here and tell this chest top that we wanted to use this chest anim top skeleton animation blueprint to drive its values. So chest top over here, we need to go and say use an animation blueprint. And then this one's called chest anim top skeleton anim blueprint. That was our default name we left in there. So compile and save that and go back and hit play. And now when we walk up to our thing to interact, yeah, I don't know why that just flopped. There's probably something to do with I was going to say collisions or something like that. Okay, so I figured out what the issue was with this. It was just a simple oversight in this chest rotation issue thing here. On this last little piece here, you can see that I had a value of 40 in there. This should have actually been a decimal value, like 0.4. And what would happen now is if I do 0.4, we go out here, it should... Yeah, that fixed the whole thing. So what the issue was is that I was multiplying 40 times 100 out here, and so it would go from 0 to 140 times over the course of 1 second. You know, it was just flipping it over and over and over again until it opens. So just make sure that in there, if you're using this type of logic or math or whatever, these are decimal values. And this 0.4 is a representation of how far this would be open. So if I said that this should be 1, then this would be fully open. You know, so if you like it at that value, you just put 1 in here, and you'll see that the lid opens up a little bit further than what it did last time. Okay, so that should get you guys where you need to be with this. And again, my name's TC Made with TC Gaming. We'll be coming back with some more RPG related stuff. Again, the intent of these is to give you the fundamental skills that you'll need to build RPG type games. You'll also use these types of skills in other games as well. But at the end of this, we'll put all these together and make a simple little demo of how this all works. Okay, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in a future episode.